Hello, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Chicken Box. I'm your host, Jay. I'm here with my co-host this week, Dr. Draper. Welcome back, Dr. Draper.
Thank you. Good to be with you, Jay. Hello to everybody who's tuning in now at the noon hour, at least noon on the East Coast. Jay, what time is it where you are?
I'm an hour ahead of you guys, or behind you guys, so it's 11 a.m. here.
11 a.m. there, and somebody in the world, it's probably bedtime, dinner time, maybe even the next day. But wherever you are in the world, certainly want to welcome you to this week's episode of the Chicken Box, powered by Afro News, the oldest Black-owned family, continuously owned Black-owned family newspaper in the country. I say newspaper hesitantly, Jay, because we're no longer just a newspaper. We are a media company, and I am so excited today to welcome everyone and to welcome our guests. Did anything else you wanted to say?
Yeah. Let me give the little bit of a bio for our guest this week. Joel Brokaw, who explains why it is not an accident that many of the most iconic figures in American culture of the 20th century all have one thing in common. They had a champion in their corner named Norman Brokaw. Quote, he was a secret driving force behind many of us fortunate enough to have him in our lives, said Clint Eastwood. Norman's personal story pulls back the curtains on the world rarely revealed, where trusted gatekeepers and innovative power brokers work behind the scenes to help deserving talent reach their highest potential. So we have Joel Brokaw here, and he is the son of Norman Brokaw, and he is going to talk about not only his father's 70-year legacy, but also his own, as well as a writer, New York Times bestseller as well. So, Joel, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you very much, Jay and Dr. Draper. A pleasure to be here.
Well, if he's going to be Jay and you're going to be Joel, I don't have a J name, but I'll be Tony for today. I want to add before Joel weighs in, we have something in common, Joel, besides writing and entertainment to a small degree. We're both fourth generation family members.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, of a family business. How about that?
That's great. Wonderful.
That's all right. See, that's the thing I don't have, so it's okay.
we got our foot in the door, but then we had to prove ourselves, correct?
Oh yeah, you get your foot in your door, and in our fourth generation family business, your first job was picking up the paper clips off the floor because my grandfather said if you put them all on the floor into a container, then we wouldn't have to order them again. Yes.
And you passed the audition, so
yes.
There you go. So, Joel, your father, as I said up top, had a 70-year career as an agent. He worked with people like Elvis Presley, Marilyn Monroe, Natalie Wood, Donna Summer, Clint Eastwood, Warren Beatty, and Bill Cosby. What is it like being even close to seeing what that was like as a kid? You know, did you get to meet any of these people? Or I'm sure you have tons of stories, obviously.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think the answer that people don't want to hear from me is how, let us just say, I was less than interested in it, because I think what I saw, and again, this is not something that people want to hear, but I saw a lot of very unhappy people for the most part. And, so the energy of it was not something that drew me in. It was anything I sort of said, what is this all about? And I think it's basically because my father was, even as a young man, he was in a powerful position. And actors and performers are by their very nature kind of insecure people, because you go out on stage or you go out on camera and you have to make something out of nothing. And I think what I just saw was, a lot of people who were wanting to curry favor with my father. And I'm like a 3 or 4 year old taking in all of this and sort of feeling like it doesn't have a really great energy about it. I have to say, though, that later on in life, I did see the value of being involved in the business, because it's so influential, and you're able to, through your work, to be able to reach out and touch millions and millions of people. And hopefully, if you have a good intention, you can put that to good use. But as I said, as a little kid, my father had a swimming pool we always had a swimming pool at the house, and growing up in LA, and a lot of the clients who wanted to curry favor with my dad would come over, and these were like people I would see on television. Maybe they were in westerns, and I would look up to them, and then they would come over, and they seemed to be like, I don't know, patting me on the head and saying things that I didn't think were always that truthful.
Okay, fair enough. Dr. Draper, your thoughts?
And I think the other thing, thanks, Joel, for that as well. The actors are actors, right? And so their personal lives are often masked on stage. Not often, a lot of times masked on stage. And so, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think it was something that my father was incredibly fascinated with, because in a lot of ways, he was a salesman, but his product was not some inert thing like a hammer or a screwdriver or a pair of shoes. He was dealing with a human being, and human beings have good days and bad days, and as an agent, you have to kind of be there for them through it all, and I think that kept it really fascinating for him. George Slaughter was a producer who was behind one of the most popular television shows in the late 1960s, a show called Laugh-In. And he said to me, Norman was an agent, a manager, a lawyer, an accountant, and a psychiatrist.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing that I would also add to that list is a social worker as well.
Okay.
Right.
Because he just had a way about him that if you walked into his office with a problem, a lot of times you walked out of there with a solution and you felt protected. And he had kind of Barry Gordy, who was one of his clients, kind of summed it up the best. He said that Norman told him early on that he had an ability to sometimes realize what a client wanted before they themselves realized it. And Barry Gordy said that he thought he was full of it until he started doing it for himself.
Right.
And so my dad had that ability, I think, to kind of, we live in this information overload place, and my father would always be able to get to the core really quickly. And like a good social worker, he would be able, if a client were having a problem, a lot of times he would find that little one action step that they could do that could help them take charge of it. And a lot of times, people, would, you mix in fame and fortune. A lot of times it goes to people's heads, and whatever problems they might have had coming in become these monsters. And sometimes people would be willing to deal with it, and other times they wouldn't. But for example, Tony Orlando, who was a client of my dad's, he had a drug problem and a mental issue following the death of a couple people who were really close to him, and he came out of that, and that was when my father started to work with him, and so my father came up with this genius idea. He heard an offer that there was a Broadway show called Barnum, and the star of the show was going to be taking a summer vacation, and they needed somebody to come in. And so my father came up with the idea for Tony Orlando to substitute for the lead in the show, because it required the actor to walk on a tightrope. And my father said to Tony, he said, if you can walk on that tightrope, then everyone's going to understand that you are no longer on drugs. And it was one of those things.
Pretty smart move.
If you talk to Tony Orlando today, he calls that like the turning point in his life, that being able to learn how to walk on the tightrope and to do it on the stage and all of that, it was like his life turned around, and it was like his clock started over again on a new life based on that. And there's so many stories like that. Donna Summer, again, stop me if I'm going on too long, but Donna Summer was also someone who had a Norman moment with him because she was in a very upset one day, and she called him from New York, and he was in his office in Beverly Hills, and explained to him the problem. And he said, "Hold on, I'll be right there." And so he got on a plane, got on a red eye. And for any of us who have taken red eyes, it's not something that you gingerly like to do.
No, of course not.
And he came and knocked on her apartment door, and he had a gift for her. And the long story short was that she had written a song called "Dim All the Lights" that was very dear to her because it was the first time that she had written a song all by herself. And the song was starting to rise on the charts. And her record company decided that they were going to release another song before the first song had peaked. And she was very upset about it because it was a major moment in her life. And so my father had a little gift for her. And it was like one of these little signs that people have on their desks. It was made out of glass, and it said Donna Summer, and underneath it said chairman of the board. And that was a signal to her that she was the boss and that she didn't have to feel victimized, not in her career, in her artistry, or in her personal life. And to the end of her days, she was incredibly grateful to my dad and said that that's when she took charge of her life and made a lot of things happen that would not have happened were it not for what he did for her at that point.
Well, that is a wonderful story. Listen, if you're just tuning in, this is a chicken box, yes, with two X's. We're not afraid to share our opinion. We have a wonderful guest with us today, in Joel Brokaw. So if you're watching on any of the social media platforms where we stream, please let us know that you're there and where you're watching from. And Joel, you've talked a lot about your dad. I want to talk a little bit more about you.
Okay.
I'm really fascinated, especially now that the 6888, of which we had a family member serve in that battalion, is streaming on Netflix, the Tyler Perry. I'm really want our listeners, our viewers, to hear a little bit more about your story and your bestseller. Something about earrings, something about Black women and earrings. I know the title.
Okay, right. Well,
but how you actually, because sometimes people think, that our entertainers automatically have everything in line. They have the publicists, they have this, they have that. But it sounds like you discovered something about Tyler Perry that had not yet happened, and as a result, you had a bestseller, won a award, and all kinds of things. So tell us a little bit about that breakthrough.
Yeah. Well, basically, I got involved with him when his stage performances had sort of started his empire. And so he was extremely well known in the African American community, but not so much outside of that. And so we were hired to do PR for him, and I went to see him at the Beacon Theater in New York, and then we had breakfast the next morning, and I said to him, I said, it was really what was the most magical for me was when you were on stage and you were ad-libbing with your co-stars. It was almost like they were just sitting on a sofa and they were just vamping. They were just ad-libbing and having a lot of fun. And I said, that is so priceless. The advice that you were coming up with was really incredible. And I said, that would really be a great book. And so he said, okay, well, let's think about that. So long story short is I put him together with a few writers and it didn't kind of click. And I said, I still think you should do this book. And he says, why don't you do it? And so I, got on a plane and I would meet up with him and I would interview him as Medea. And I would just ask, it started off as an advice book, and it was just so funny. And he would say something and off color, and he would say to me, he would break out of Medea, and he says, "You can't use that in the book." But it was, and in fact, one of the days that I flew into Houston to work with him, and he says, "I got to cancel it today. I just am not feeling up. I'm not feeling up for it." And I said, "Well, I've come the whole way from LA to do this. Why don't we get together and see what we come up with? And if it's no good, we'll just stop. Okay." And he says, "Okay." And that was, of course, like the best day that we ever had.
So when was that, Joel? How long ago was that you and Tyler Perry connected?
That was in 2004, 2005.
Okay, about 20 years ago. Okay.
Yeah, and so basically, my job was to kind of try to put it into a book form, and it was a little bit challenging because he speaks in this New Orleans accent, and the grammar is all over the place. And so I sort of said, now how can I preserve the essence of this great dialect, but also make it readable? And
Right.
the other thing that I wanted to do was I wanted to say, this is just, he is such a genius. And I wanted people who never heard of Tyler Perry to be able to pick up the book and really have a good time with it and really enjoy it. And so I'm glad that it became a #1 New York Times bestseller. And I think I probably could have printed the yellow pages from the phone book and had a bestseller because of his popularity. It's no accident. The man is just extraordinary, and I'm just so delighted with who and what he has become and the leadership that he shows.
I mean, he is a force. I will say that. I mean, his story in and of itself it's the most rags to riches story, not just as far as financially, but just quite literally in influence and things like that. So it's an incredibly impressive story. I'm curious. It's interesting to bring up Tyler Perry because he has this latest film, The 688, which features in some part Mary McLeod Bethune is in the film in her relationship with Eleanor Roosevelt and what have you. And you actually have somewhat of a connection there as well. And I want you to talk about you worked for Dorothy Height for quite some time.
That's correct. Yes. And I mean, I get goosebumps really when I think about her just now, because she just had a life of impact. And when you sat together with her, you really felt connected to history. And it's like if somebody's so blessed to live almost to be 100 years old and to be involved in being in the epicenter of everything going on, and being a participant in it, it's like you could be talking about Langston Hughes or something like that, and she would say, "Oh yes, well he used to come over for dinner on Fridays in Harlem." It's like or like I'm forgetting his name right now, but just you would mention anyone, and she would have known that person. Yeah. And so again, it was like you felt like the history book came alive. And even like with Eleanor Roosevelt and Mary McLeod Bethune, Dorothy Height had a horrible traffic accident when she was a young woman. And she would tell the story about being in the hospital at Howard University. And Eleanor Roosevelt was the first lady, and she came to visit Dorothy Height at the hospital. And just how that was in that day and age, almost a shocking kind of thing, that how the first lady, a white woman, would come to the African-American hospital to see a young woman. And so, you just felt like, as I said, and she would tell stories about Eleanor Roosevelt that were just incredible. How you would sit in the room with Eleanor Roosevelt and she would make you feel like, even if you were with 100 other people, that she was talking to you directly. That and just that kind of, incredible charisma. And unfortunately, it's like you talk to people nowadays, young people, they don't know who Eleanor Roosevelt was and how important she was. But Dorothy Height was someone who, as I said, it was the greatest gift that I was ever given, to be able to work with her for 30 years. And I would come into Washington, D.C. once a month, and I would sit with her. And even if she were just quiet, even if she just sat there thinking, you were learning something from her, because she knew how to move people. She knew how to motivate them. She knew how to deal with the most difficult situations in the most enlightened way. It's like she had this ability that somebody once explained it, that she had an iron fist in a velvet glove. And as I said, I think about her every day. I would say, how would she have handled this situation? It was just amazing.
So Jay, she was always a lady, Dorothy Irene Height, always with a hat. Very seldom raised her voice, but her voice projected in a way that commanded the room. She was in my mother's generation, but because of the sorority connection and other connections, I was in her presence often.
Oh, wow.
So the National Council of Negro Women, Delta Sigma Theta, the Black Family Reunion, any roundtable of substance during her day, Dorothy Irene Height was, and still to this day, she is revered, not just by those of us in the sorority, but she's revered nationally. She was a civil rights leader, as Joel says, but had a way of commanding the room, the attention, and being well versed.
Yeah. For example, when they were planning the March on Washington, and the famous "I Have a Dream" speech, she was in the room when all the civil rights leaders were gathered together, and she was the only female voice in it. And they were talking about, well, who's going to speak when, and how long are they going to speak for, and all of that. And she was the lone voice that said, I think that Dr. King should be the last speaker, and we should not set a time limit on him. And that's what happened. And of course, that is like the most iconic moment from this incredible time period in American history called the Civil Rights Movement. But her fingerprints are all over it. And I think another thing that I just want to say about her is that she was a very, very powerful person in her spirit. But like my father, what my father and she had in common above everything was that they were not what's in it for me people. Right. It was always about it's about having a life of service. And people would say to her, you never married, and you are in your office and you are constantly working all the time. Like, what's in it for you? And basically she would say, you don't understand. When I do something to help lift you up, I am also uplifted. And so for her, the reward always came from helping people. And my dad was also the same. It's like he would never say, like, what's in it for me? How is this going to be a stepping stone, for my ambition and so forth? He always put all that stuff behind him and said, if I am serving you well, then I am going to achieve what I want in life without even asking for it. And that was the same for her. She just had this selflessness about her. And it gave her incredible return in her life. she worked with all the presidents and got the Congressional Gold Medal and the Presidential Medal of Freedom and a U.S. postage stamp, and none of that would have happened if she were just ambition driven. It was a life of service, and I think that that she basically showed us that's where our success comes from. And my father was the same way. He was always there to try to help people, even competitors. If they were having a health problem or something, he would call and say, "Hey, I heard about this. There's a great doctor." And, I can't tell you the number of times people have come up to me and said, "Your father helped me when I was having a rough time, or my family was having a rough time." And those are in the end of the day, making the money and getting the paycheck and all of that are fine. But the karma that you get from helping other people is so powerful. And that's what the two of them were all about. And I try to follow in their footsteps.
I was going to ask, do you find that your career is based in this general idea of an act of service as far as your writing and the other work that you've done?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it all comes down to intention that I feel like, there's that cliche about, service is the rent we pay. And,
right.
And I feel like, as I said, I have seen it so many times that the greatest accomplishments and the greatest satisfaction have come out of things that have come out of our generosity of spirit. And, if anything, the book that I wrote about my dad, to me, it's like I get the greatest amount of satisfaction when I hear from people who are far removed from his world, who feel like they had a relationship with him through reading the book, and they have a takeaway from it to say, maybe what he was all about is old school. And, people can say, they don't make him like him anymore. He's the last of a dying breed. But the values that he was able to create great success out of nothing are still the same, which is...
Yeah, those things don't change.
Yeah. And it's like you put the relationships first and you say, what can you and I, Jay and Tony, do together that can increase your opportunities?
Right. Yeah. No, it's funny that you say it, because I feel like that's sort of a perfect sort of cap on not only your father's story, Dorothy Heights' story, and your own story, right? This idea of just how do you project this, trying to help others as a sort of a holistic way of looking at life. So in that spirit, what I would say is I'll get on the box, which is our soapbox about what we want people to take away from this interview. I'm sorry, Dr. Draper, do you have another question?
Well, that was the only question I had, and thank you so much for putting your father's story. So often we have stories and they don't go anywhere beyond our own memories. I just put my grandfather's story down in a book called Prayer and Pen that Our Daily Bread published, and he was the publisher of the Afro from 1922, and his father died until 1967. Wow. When he died, and he wrote a prayer about everything. So before the March on Washington, he wrote a prayer. Afterwards, he wrote prayers about W.E.B. Du Bois, who was his neighbor. He wrote prayers on, so there are 14 chapters, along with his original prayers that have never been published, coupled with Afro archival photos and things like that. So writing things down, that's important. Let me ask you this, Joel. I know we were talking about your dad and your dad's book, wonderful career. You followed him. People today who say, you know what? I either want to be like Joel Brokaw, or listen, I want to work with Joel Brokaw. I don't have a high profile yet, but I have, all of these things that I'm doing or involved in. How do people even connect with a good publicist, if they're interested in entertainment of any kind?
I think that it's like you don't want to put the wagon before the horse. I think the most important thing is you get involved, and like one of my clients says, an actor is not an actor unless they're acting. And so I think if you do good work and you're diligent and you're serious and you keep a lot of room in your life for spontaneity, I think you make things happen. And again, I think if you're too attached to like, I'm doing this because I want to achieve this concrete accomplishment, I think a lot of times you cut yourself off from the magic that you can create in your life. It's like with this book that I've written, or any book that I've written, I always sort of say, you know, I don't really care if my success is not going to be measured in how much money I make off of it or something. It's like, it's really in the connections that we make.
Right.
And it can lead to places that you never would have dreamed of. And so I think the main thing is like to really, you know, if you want to create the change, you got to really work inside yourself first. And you have to really be kind of very clear on, you know, what your intention is. And I think that we all have a light in ourselves. And I think there's so many things in our society that want to dim that light. And I think that you have to really put that aside and really examine your values and understand your history and understand that you are making the new history. And so it's like, you know, as I said, I applaud you for writing the book about your father, because, you know, people say that the church is the backbone of the African American communities. I also say that the newspapers like the Afro and the radio stations are also right there with it. And so, so as I said, it's really like taking stock of yourself, being serious, have some fun, and do the best that you can. And I think you will make things happen, and the right people will come forward. But you have to really, you have to put yourself out there in a way that's accessible to people.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So that's good. That's good advice for anybody who's watching and wondering how you're going to make it. You want to be like Joel. You want to be like his dad, Norman. You want to be like Dorothy Height, Tyler Perry. Joel says, put yourself out there.
Yeah. I mean, Tyler Perry had nothing until he watched an Oprah episode, and she just said, start writing. You know, if you're stuck on something, start writing. And that's what he did. And everything happened from that. So if you're not in action on behalf of yourself, you can't expect anybody else to do it for you.
Correct. Cool. That's great advice in life, no matter what people are pursuing. And the other thing I say to people all the time, Joel, I mean, I can answer part of this question, is when people say to me, but I'm too old. I said, guess what? If you live till tomorrow, you'll be older than you were yesterday.
That's right.
Well, I look at it like Frank Lloyd Wright, the famous American architect.
Yep.
He was not really that successful until he was in his 70s. So he wasn't really considered to be the great master until really late in life. So, yeah.
I mean, what did they say? Vera Wang didn't design her first dress until she was in her 40s, right?
That's right.
So, yeah, it's never too late. And, you know, there's a million other examples of that. I mean,
for sure.
So, yeah, well, I would say that this is a great conversation, Joel. So thank you for coming in. But now I would like to do our segment where we call Get on the Box, which is, as I explained before, is about what do you want people to sort of take away from this interview, or sort of final words. So I will go to you again there, Joel.
Well, as I said, I mean, I think that all of us have something to give. My father was a believer in talent, and I think all of us have talent, and all of us have a story to tell. And storytelling is, from the first days of the Homo sapiens, has been the way that we've connected with each other. So my feeling is that, you know, the human connection that we can make, the caring, through the easiest thing, through the written page or through a smile with a stranger, that let's really never lose faith in our ability to connect with each other and to help each other and be there for each other without wanting something in return. That's when things really start to happen in some miraculous ways.
Excellent. Dr. Draper, it is your turn on the box.
So I concur that everyone has a story. We were fortunate in our family that we are storytellers, and so we chronicle stories all the time. And what we think is a new story usually is not new, but how we tell it is new. And so we're not a newspaper, we're a media company, we are storytellers. So I want to just co-sign what Joel said. And at the Afro, I'm going to say a little bit more about the Afro. We have stories dating back to the late 1800s, some that have never been told before. So we are organizing that archive to make it more accessible to the public. That's a service that our 501c3 is working on diligently, as we have more than 3 million photographs. And so for people who are interested in telling their own and writing their own stories, think about the Black press as a resource. Everyone's archives are not as organized as ours, but there are ways. If you go to afrocharities.org, you can make a research request. We'll even do a little bit of the research for you. So we're always looking for stories. And so I want to say thank you to Joel for coming on and sharing your story, at least a part, a sliver of your story.
Yes.
Right. A sliver of your story. So thank you for that, because a lot of times those who promote other people's stories, we don't know your story. And so thank you for sharing a bit of your story in the book that you've written about your dad, and sharing so many stories of other people that you've met along the way. And so again, saying to those who are watching, we appreciate you tuning in. If you don't, some people say, well, I don't write. Well, all of us write. But in today's technology obsessed and driven world, you have a cell phone, you have a way to tell a story. You can talk your story, and AI will translate your story into words and even make it grammatically.
Let's be careful about that.
As long as you don't ask AI to add any facts to you.
Right, exactly.
You take the facts of your own story, it will rewrite that and not add to that story, as long as your basic facts are. Now, don't ask AI, hey, my name is, can you make up a story? That's going to be messed up. So I'm on the box to encourage people. I say to people all the time, they say, wow, your family story is fascinating. I said, your family story is fascinating too. The difference between your family and my family is that we chronicled our stories. Every place we went before there were cell phones, we took a picture. No picture was unimportant. And my grandfather believed if you could walk, you could write. And so we had to, we could not just cop out and say, I don't feel like writing that. No, you had to write. So that's my encouragement. I'm on the box. Joel, thank you for keeping your family's legacy going. Thank you for all of the work that you've done with people, even though a lot of people may not know Dorothy Irene Height, and they may not have known Tyler Perry until your book was written. There are a lot of people who do.
There you go.
Yeah, she's on my wall right over there. So
she's on one of my walls.
Like, there she is right there.
She's on one of my walls someplace. Yeah. I had a lot of things on my walls though. So I'm off the box. I'm almost off the box. The last thing I'd like to say to everyone is, if Impeccable, our third co-host, was on, he would say, for less than the cost of 2 Uber Eats, please go to afro.com. Please take out a subscription. Yes, we have newsletters that are free, but free does not sustain our business. And if we don't ask, you won't know. So we're asking for support. And there it is. $10 a month, $100 a year. Nothing is $10 any longer. Thank you, Joel, for being with us on today.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you, Jay.
Okay, so I'll just close out by saying this. Joel, thank you for coming in once again. It's a great story, both your father's and yours, about this idea of service and about using the skills not only just in working as an agent, but clearly your father was a social worker and a friend and all these other things to these people that he worked with. But I think sort of the big overarching message here is putting yourself out there, not only to just work, but to help others. So I always like to quote somebody who is much more of a profound speaker than I ever will be. But you guys may have heard of this person. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, quote, life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? And I think that's a very good question. And if you can ask yourself that, and then you can come back with a great response or figure out how do you answer that question properly, I think you'll do all right in life. So thank you, Joel, for your time.
And it doesn't have to be something huge. It can be really something small. And
sometimes the smaller things help. Just getting something off people's plate, enough for allowing them to have a little bit of a clear mind so they can do what they need to do. You never can tell, right? Okay, so thank you for your time, both Dr. Draper and Joel, and we will see you guys next week with another episode of The Chicken Box. Thanks.
Thank you again.